Right, so let's go live back to Chriselda Lewis, who's been covering all the strike action, or lack of action, should we say, at O R Tambo International tonight. Chriselda, firstly, do we have an idea of how many flights are being affected, where these flights were going, sort of the volumes of flights affected by this strike at the moment?
Look, Francis, the information that I have currently is that SAA obviously operates more than 100 aircraft per day, but what I do know is that the highest frequency would be between Johannesburg and Cape Town. So you would have quite a number of people since at the start of the strike that were affected. That will be those travellers between Johannesburg and Cape Town. So if we look at the region, what I do know is that you have the highest frequency of flights between Johannesburg and Zimbabwe. So that would be the second block, if I can put it that way, that would be hit, because on the continent you have the highest number of flights between Johannesburg and Zimbabwe, if we're talking about SAA. Very difficult to calculate if you look at the frequency between Johannesburg or South Africa in terms of SAA and the rest of the world. But Francis, what I just learned a few moments ago is that SAA might make an announcement on Sunday. Now let me give you clarity pertaining to that. Tomorrow, of course, you're going to have the mediation by a senior facilitator from the CCMA, which will mediate the talks between the unions and the employer, which is SAA. We're expecting those mediation talks to drag on for hours tomorrow, because what we understand is that SAA is not budging from the 5.9% that it's put on the table. The union is not budging from the 8%. Let's see if that senior facilitator at the CCMA would be able to try and find some kind of resolution. So when I talk about a possible statement from SAA on Sunday, just a few moments ago I learned that depending on how those talks themselves do pan out tomorrow, SAA would need to make a decision on Sunday. You would recall they initially said they were going to cancel all their flights regionally, domestically and internationally for Friday and Saturday, and then later this afternoon they indicated that they were extending the cancellation of their domestic and regional to Monday. So now on Sunday they would need to take a decision on what then they plan to do if the strike itself is not resolved. But what we do know is that the international flights will resume on Sunday. According to SAA, from what we do know, is that they were able to amass enough manpower to ensure that the flights that will operate between Johannesburg and the international destinations, that does go ahead. So while those mediation talks, and much focus will be on that tomorrow to see if these sides are able to reach some kind of consensus, on Sunday SAA would need to take a decision on whether it will again extend the cancellation of some of these domestic and regional flights, and perhaps give feedback as well on how the international routes themselves are operating. But a lot of work certainly is being done behind me here, Francis. SAA, I think, has been working around the clock. I've been watching the situation quite closely here, and I think in particular because you've got a number of people who are extremely frustrated. We've seen our colleagues since very early this morning talking to people who don't know what they're going to do. But SAA has certainly given assurance that some of those international passengers who would not be able to get on other airlines to go to those destinations, they would be able to accommodate them here in Johannesburg, even though to much of their inconvenience. But certainly they're trying to pull out all the stops to ensure that the passengers in this instance do not suffer the most. But a close eye on those talks there tomorrow, and SAA having to come to some decision on Sunday if some consensus is not reached.
Sure. You also have to consider the trust of customers, so maybe they have no alternatives, hoping those flights will resume on Sunday. But I'm sure there are not many new bookings on SAA right now. Chriselda, just remind us where the parties are, who wants what those unions are demanding, saying that this is an indefinite strike.
Well, you recall, Francis, initially SAA had nothing on the table and had subsequently then moved to 5.9%, while the unions are currently sitting on 8% and they're not budging on that. I mean, that's the information we've received at this point, is that they're not willing to budge from the 8%. You have SAA on the one point that says, I cannot move beyond the 5.9%, because you must recall what SAA has been saying is that even the money that they're asking for currently from government itself is money that it wants to use to sustain the operations of this ailing airline. So we're not talking about money, even if received, would be money to deal with the issues of wage discrepancies or wage issues that are currently on the table. So the 5.9% for SAA and the union saying 8%, but you recall there's also on the other side where there's some agreements that have been reached in terms of how that 5.9% would be paid. Initially, there had been no dateline that had been put on what SAA had put on the table, but now they're saying over a particular period of time. So the expectation that I think, and the sense that I'm getting, Francis, is that they're hoping to go into that meeting tomorrow and argue with the unions to say they've made some kind of shift, but the unions themselves are not moving. They're saying that the workers cannot, suffer at the expense of what they have termed long-term looting and mismanagement at the national carrier. So it's really a situation that's being watched closely, and I think in terms of the image of South Africa as well, a bit earlier on, I heard our colleague Sherwin Bryce-Pease speaking to the president about what was happening here in South Africa pertaining to the national carrier, and the president saying it is a labour issue. But in speaking to some of these people here behind me who've come to South Africa or visited several parts of South Africa for whatever reason, whether it was business or pleasure, but the sentiment that they're getting is that it doesn't really fare well for South Africa's image at this point in time. So if you want to talk about the perception of some of the individuals behind me, most of them really frustrated at this point, and that image tends to be blanketed across the image of the country itself. Whether that's fair or not, we could certainly have that debate on another day. But I guess, Francis, tomorrow all eyes will certainly be on those talks to try and find some kind of resolution, in particular over reports of the Public Enterprises Minister Pravin Gordhan himself saying that this national carrier is not big enough to fail. So whose interest would it be in, according to SAA, as they're putting at the moment? They're saying that if there is no resolution to this, if they're losing more than 50 million rand a day, and this is an indefinite strike, if the national carrier itself collapses, then there are no winners in this instance. So certainly all eyes are on tomorrow on that mediation process with that senior facilitator from the CCMA.
Chriselda, finally, and please keep it brief, we're running out of time, but I'm interested to know how many of those passengers that you've spoken to, we know SAA is trying to accommodate them on other flights. Are plans being made? It's getting late. Will they be accommodated in hotels and things like that, mostly if they don't get on those flights?
Well, Francis, some of the irate passengers that I spoke to just a couple of hours ago when we started the broadcast, it clearly seems they've moved from here now and have been accommodated. One of the gentlemen was travelling to Accra, and there was no flight that could leave for Accra today on any of the other airlines that SAA is requesting assistance from. So he would, of course, need to be put in a hotel. Accommodation would need to be made for them. And I guess that would be the commitment that SAA has made, even in the earlier interview that we did with Tlali, the spokesperson. So whether they keep true to their word, certainly we'll have to speak to many more people about whether they've stuck to their word or not.
All right, thank you very much, Chriselda Lewis, live from OR Tambo International Airport. And of course, we'll follow that mediation process organised by the CCMA at SAA's request tomorrow.